The facts, dates, and events presented in this video are from the member's best recollection and may not be fully accurate. This video is intended for entertainment purposes only. Always consult with your local union about your rights and duties at your workplace. The opinions shared on this video are our own and do not necessarily represent my employer's positions, strategies, or opinions. All views shared are protected under the National Labor Relations Act.
All right, so in this episode, we're going to be covering feeder, and I have Danny Arlen from Local 404 in West Massachusetts, also the host of the Biweekly Grievance Show. I'll put the link down below. And we are going to be covering all the feeder language, the new changes, and I'll just go down the list of questions I have for him, and he can tell us what's new in the language. So let's start off, RPCDs ended up getting the 4-6 punch language removed. How does that work for feeder?
Under Article 11, 4-6 punch, unfortunately, it does not include the feeder department. I will say that hasn't really been an issue, at least from what I've seen in my area, but we also do not have that protection if it became an issue.
All right. And so when it comes to safety, I know safety is a huge thing in feeder. If you have an accident in a feeder truck, it can be catastrophic. It can be people can lose their lives through it. So this is actually important stuff. Now, is there any changes in the safety language with the feeder department?
Yeah. So under Article 18, Section 7, trailer configuration, there's always been some language about, making sure that your lead trailer is heavier than your rear trailer. Under the new language that was added, it says, if there is a dispute over the loads, that the company will remove the seals and to confirm the percentages of the loads while on property. My issue with that is the old language where it states that if a driver feels the percentages aren't correct or the unit doesn't handle property, they can ask to have the seals removed. But to be honest with you, we don't weigh our trailers, so you're relying on the paperwork with the trailer, which very frequently is filled out before the load even is put together. So very often it might say 80% and there may only be 40% a trailer in there. And you could end up putting the light trailer ahead, which could cause you a safety issue. If you had to slam on your brakes and your rear trailer is heavier, it is going to come around on you. You're going to jackknife the truck and somebody's going to get hurt. So I wish it had just said that the loads need to be verified before putting the set together, like open the loads and have them sealed by the driver so the driver can verify the percentages before taking it on the road. Because even the part about, if the unit doesn't handle properly, and it also states while on UPS property, at 5 miles an hour, you don't feel anything with those two trailers behind you. It's not until you're up to speed or if you have to slow down, do you start feeling the weight of the trailers and that they might be out of line. So its intent is well, but it, in my opinion, did not address the issue because the company's not going to let you just keep popping trailers open to verify the weights while you're putting them together. So it's a little bit of an issue, but I tell all the drivers, it's your life and it's your license. So if you need to pop the seals, do it, and we'll fight the consequences afterwards because if there are any, because it's your life.
Absolutely. And now let's move on to airport badges. Is there any differences with the new airport badge language?
It's really simple. It basically states that whereas most feeder drivers, if not all of them, are required to get an airport badge to go on property to get trailers and stuff at the airport hubs, that's a process and it wasn't always paid for. And the new language gives up to 2 hours pay at straight time for obtaining your airport badge, similar to the 2 hours pay that we get for our DOT physicals. So that's a nice add to the contract.
Now, was there any changes in taking the work off the rails to create more ground jobs?
So there's a whole section under Article 26 competition, Section 6, similar to the 22.4 language that was just completely crossed off the map. They did the same thing here. They completely removed the removal of loads from the rail section of the contract. My understanding is that that was a good win for us, because the company was abusing that, with the subcontractors. They were removing loads, and I think the intent of the language originally, and some people would argue it was a concession back in the 2018 contract, but the intent was to supposedly build more feeder jobs, and all it did was allow the company to create more subcontracting jobs. And I personally would have liked to have seen the language stay in and just add language to designate the loads to new union Teamster feeder jobs. Because like in my building, we're a small department, and when we lose routes, we never get them back. So it'd be nice to create more jobs. But I understand in negotiations, sometimes getting language added is a lot harder than just removing the problem. So I'm not totally satisfied, but do think this is a win, removing that language, because it was being abused by the company. So that's a big win.
When we're talking about competition under Article 26, is there any new language that has to deal with that?
Yeah, so they addressed some of the issues of taking work and using substitute transportation such as airplanes, helicopters, ship, or rail cars. And they just kind of redefined some of it and added in language that basically states that any new changes in the structure of that needs to be brought up to the Premium Services Committee for review and approval. So basically they need to negotiate that stuff. And then a lot of times these changes are what they call temporary changes. And a temporary change used to be anything less than a year, and they've redefined that to 6 months, unless the circumstances beyond the company's control. It could be extended for another 6-month period. And then any new feeder positions. This is old language, but it's worth noting is any new feeder positions created as a result of returning loads to the ground from the rails shall be counted towards the employer's obligation to create full-time jobs under Article 22(3) of this agreement. So the way I read this is any new feeder jobs from taking stuff off the rails would diminish the number of 22(3) jobs that the company's obligated to fulfill in this contract, which was 7,500 new jobs over the life of the contract. In that same competition, it discusses subcontracting, and the new language basically designates where the subcontractors can go on property and for how long they can be on property. There's supposed to be a designated area for them to go to, and they can only be on property. Like during peak season, they can be on property up to 4 hours. If not, they need to leave. And non-peak months, they can be on property for up to an hour. It limits it a little bit. It designates where they should go. As a feeder driver, I would rather go with the policy of that they drop it at the gates and a union position shifter comes in and moves the load on property. That would at least ensure that we'd have more union jobs in the shifting department on properties than having the subcontractors pulling it into the yard and spending time on property. It just doesn't sit well from a union perspective. The employer can also, and under the new language, can't use subcontracting to avert overtime for the feeder department. So that's good language, but in my opinion, any subcontracting affects overtime, because if we had more loads to pull, we'd get more overtime. So it would also create more jobs in the union part of the company. So that's something we're going to fight forever with this company. We're never going to get rid of subcontracting. It's just never going to happen. There are times in the year where it's just not effective, and I never sided with the company, but from a company perspective, I could see their point that they're not going to put more brown trucks on the road and hire more people for peak when it's a 2-month period. So I understand some of that language. I just know this company and how they abuse you give them an inch, they take a mile. So I'm not a complete fan of that, but at least it addresses it and gives us something to work with to limit these guys on property.
And so now let's get into the sleeper team language. I know you're not a sleeper, but is there any way you can just kind of go over some of the changes that were made?
Under Article 43 premium services, sleeper teams, it says the employer may use subcontractors for new custom contracts for a reasonable startup period but in no event shall startup period exceed 30 days. Any use of this provision shall be reviewed and approved by the union chair of the premium service committee. So if all of a sudden there's a new need, they can use subcontractors to get it up and running while they train more employees and get more equipment to handle that new service, right? So they put a time frame on it so that they don't just use subcontractors. They have to work towards putting in the employees and the equipment in place to handle that new responsibility. It says under also sleeper cab runs approved to the provisions of Article 43. It says no seniority employee shall be forced to drive in a sleeper cab run unless otherwise, and this is the new language, unless otherwise provided in their feeder work rules or local union practice. If the bidding process is exhausted and the new job vacancies are not filled, the following procedures shall apply. These jobs will be offered to other facilities within the jurisdiction of the local which have qualified feeder drivers on layoff, displaced, or otherwise not holding a bid within the feeder classification before hiring off the streets. So basically it allows them to use other facility drivers that are qualified for the position to come in and fill the need before going to an outside hire, which is a home run. That's great language. It seems pretty straightforward, and it is a nice add to that. Then there's I think it's more of a cleanup thing. It says there shall be no two-person operation on runs with loads in less than 550 outbound miles on the first leg. So they added the word with loads and on the first leg because they scratched out the old language. So the old language said there shall be no two-person operation with runs of less than 550 miles on the outbound miles and 1,100 miles round trip. So they got away from the round trip language and just went to, if the first leg isn't at least 550 miles, that they shall not use two-person sleeper team. Also, a little farther down, there's some adjustments to some pay that they get as far as under unusual circumstances in which an employer is unable to furnish satisfactory lodging, the employee shall be paid, and it was $50, now it's $100 for each rest period, except where accommodations are unavailable for such figure, and is necessary for the driver to pay in excess of $100. They shall receive reimbursement of actual cost of the room. So they cleaned up the language, upping the allowance from 50 to $100, because I can't imagine you can get a hotel room for $50. But in the event that they can't find one within the $100, that they can pay for it and be reimbursed.
Okay.
Then there's some rate changes. I don't know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's something I would speak to people that work in the sleeper department. They would have more knowledge as far as how good or bad that pay differential is. I'm assuming it's an improvement. Whether it's enough to satisfy whatever the issue was would be something that only somebody in the sleeper department probably would be able to explain to you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, if anybody's from Sleeper and you have more to add and you want to come on the channel, just email me, roselhub@yahoo.com. I don't want to do anybody a disservice, but I do really appreciate Dan coming on the channel and trying to dissect this language, because I know nothing about sleeper or feeder. So having him on is really help educating me as well. If you haven't done so already, check out the bi-weekly grievance show. Like I said, I'll put it down below. Dan, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll get into the next episode.